The housing market has gotten really weird over the last few years since the pandemic. A few weeks ago, I shared a video that highlighted why I choose to rent even though I technically can afford to buy. And today we are back for part 2 of that video, and I am going to run through some different examples that highlight the differences in costs between renting and buying in this current market. There's a lot of personal finance jargon on the internet, but here at Break Your Budget, we cut through the crap and focus on getting the basics right. So before we get into this video, I want to highlight a couple of quick disclaimers. First being that I am not criticizing anyone's decision to purchase property. I very much so look forward to the time where I do make the decision to purchase property. And at that point in time, it will at least make life sense if it doesn't make financial sense. Because in the current market, in many places, not all, but many places, the numbers are just not working out in the favor of the buyer. All this to say, I also really want to highlight that the conversation of purchasing a home versus renting is so unbelievably nuanced, and a lot of that nuance was actually highlighted in the comments of my previous video. So if you haven't gone back and watched that video, you definitely should. And I do recommend reading through the comments because a lot of people did highlight that, there are more emotional aspects of purchasing. Having a home when you reach retirement can create a semblance of stability. So I don't want to discount that. And I also am totally fully aware of that. So you don't need to comment it again here. However, if you want to, feel free because it helps boost the video. But there is just so much nuance with renting versus buying, and the numbers can change and vary so significantly depending on where you choose to purchase, what the rental market looks like in that area, if you're paying PMI or HOA, or what the property taxes are, how much money you put down, what the interest rates are. Like, there is no yes or no, black or white way to frame up this type of conversation. And I did receive a lot of comments saying that purchasing a home is always better. And I do also want to comment on that because historically speaking, the numbers did make more sense for home ownership for many, many years. But the pandemic has significantly shifted and changed the housing market and the rental market overall. So in many places, that belief system no longer holds. So hopefully what we talk through in this video will really highlight that. So now let's chat about what we're going to cover in this video. So I have chosen 3 cities or 3 places across the US where I'm going to run through a comparison of a 2-bed, 2-bath home, apartment, condo, townhome, depending on which location we are in. And we're going to compare the cost of home ownership versus the cost to rent in each specific area. The 3 areas that I chose, they're all, unique to me. First is Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I chose Cape Cod because that's where my parents live. And if I were to purchase a home, that's sort of like my top choice of where I would buy. Second is Chicago because I currently live in Chicago. And then third is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because Pittsburgh was recently ranked the most affordable city to purchase a home. These are the 3 cities that we're going to start with. However, I am very open to continuing this series and making it a recurring series on this channel where I highlight different cities or different areas all across the US. So if you are interested in that, please leave a comment and let me know if you want to see that. And if you have a specific area and a specific makeup of property type, so like a 2-bed, 2-bath home or a 3-bed, 1-bath home or whatever that you want me to search for and run these calculations on, leave it in the comments. And I'm happy to do that going forward, especially if this video performs well. So let me know. The other thing that I want to highlight here is that I did specifically build out a renting versus buying calculator for this video, and I have cleaned the whole thing up and I've made it available for purchase. So if you are interested, that calculator is going to cost $10. It's available in the show notes and you can run as many calculations as you want. This template, like all of my other templates, is a one-time purchase. If I ever make any updates to it, which with any new template, once there are eyeballs on it and people using it, there's always feedback and suggestions. So any updates that I make, you get for free as part of your purchase. So if you want to just run your own calculations and not wait for me to do it in a future video, you can purchase that template below and you'll get a full tour and see everything involved in these calculations in the rest of this video. One more quick thing is, as part of these calculations too, we do have to make some more educated forecasting assumptions, right? And because it's a customizable calculator, and again, there is so much nuance to home ownership, we have to make, again, some assumptions. And the calculations are never going to be exactly perfect because every situation is different. None of us have a crystal ball and none of us can predict the future. So the goal of these calculations is to give you like a generalized estimate as close as we can get with the information we have today based off of, a specific set of inputs, which we'll run through, and just get an idea of if you were to follow this path for the term of a mortgage, which you can choose 30 years, 20 years, whatever, this is what your general outflow would be versus if you were to rent versus what the difference would be if you were to invest that money, assuming, a return that you can decide what it is. For these examples, I'll be using 7%. So I'm going to stop talking now and let's get into all of these examples. Oh, one more quick thing. Polite discourse is welcome in the comments. I would really challenge you, if your beliefs are challenged and you're feeling triggered as part of this video, or you have thoughtful or polite feedback, you can leave it in the comments. But if you're going to be an asshole, I would really go touch some grass. Okay, so we are in the rent versus buy calculator here for Cape Cod, and I'm going to show you the two pieces of property we are comparing. So first, we are looking at a 2-bed, 2-bath home located in Hyannis for $699,000. So this is a pretty standard Cape Cod, coastal home. Hyannis is a pretty popular area. It's within Barnstable County. Super nice, 2-bed, 2-bath, pretty much relatively recently updated. The comparison is going to be a 2-bed, 2-bath, comparable square footage home for rent in East Sandwich, which is pretty close to Barnstable. So, as you can see here, it's a nice home. It's all, again, recently renovated. I think that these two places are comparable. So what I have done is gone into the rent versus buy calculator, and we will run some of these calculations based off of the inputs here. So for the purchase, we are spending $699,000. That's the asking price of the home. For 20% down payment, that is $139,800. I am assuming 20% down. If you wanted to change this to 10%, you also have to make sure you include PMI, which is usually 0.5 to 1.5% of your mortgage amount. And that will calculate PMI out for you here. But I'm going to assume 20% for the sake of ease, because also if I was purchasing a home, I'd be putting 20% down at least. So this will calculate out for you the down payment amount, which I just mentioned, and the amount you would take out on your mortgage. We're going to assume a 30-year mortgage term, which is 360 periods, and interest rates as of today, August 28th, when I am recording this video, are 6.64%. This is where things get nuanced because there's opportunities to buy down your interest rate. The interest rates fluctuate. You may get a lower interest rate depending on where you finance. You can also refinance your interest at a later point. But again, because this is a customizable calculator meant to be used by many, many people, it's very challenging to build that nuance into this. If you are an Excel expert and you know how to do that, please contact me and we can work something out and you can help me build it in. It needs to work in Google Sheets. So if you're somebody who knows how to do that, I'm all ears. I'd like to hear it. But for now, we're assuming one interest rate and that's going to stay what it is. So this would calculate your monthly payment to be $3,586,000. So $3,586,000 for your principal and interest payment based off of these inputs. Now we're getting into property taxes. I pulled this property tax rate off of the listing on Zillow. So that leads to $4,474 annually in property tax. Home insurance, I'm making a baseline assumption that it's about $7,000 a year. I know that's kind of high, but insurance is really expensive and it continues to go up. So I feel like that will just factor in insurance premium changing over the course of the next 30 years because I have it straight lined as part of these calculations because again, it's not something that we know for sure. It fluctuates year over year. So we're calculating out a pretty baseline average. Maintenance, I'm assuming 1% of the purchase price of the home annually, which I found off of Google. So that is about $6,990, about $7,000 a year. Again, maintenance may fluctuate. One year it could be zero, the next year it could be 20 grand. So this is a pretty good baseline estimate. And then since this is a standalone home, There's no HOA, and we're putting 20% down, so there's no PMI. So this brings our total monthly payment inclusive of these three inputs to $5,125. Over here, we have the rent, which is $2,600 with an annual increase of 2%. Because I know somebody's going to say something, I'm actually just going to increase that to 3% here so that we can be pretty even. Insurance, renter's insurance is always less than homeowner's insurance. So I'm forecasting that out to be $250 a year and then 1% annual increase. So that will increase a little bit. And that is all factored into the calculations as well. And then we also have to plug in our annual growth rate for investments. So I'm assuming 7%. So if we look at these numbers, this is the amortization calculator based off of this particular mortgage for the home ownership aspect. This includes your interest payments annually, how much is going towards your principal. So as you can see, you're paying the most interest in the first few years. Like the majority of your payments on your mortgage are going towards your interest in those first couple of years. And then that sort of starts to swap out where you're paying less in interest and more towards your principal towards the end. We have your property taxes, your home insurance, and your maintenance, which again, I've just straight lined out here because I think having an average estimate annually is the best way to forecast. Because again, these fluctuate all the time. So it's hard to know what those and factor in what those annual fluctuations would be. But this is probably the low end of what you would be paying over the 30 years. And this brings your total cost to own over those 30 years to $1.9 million. So about $2 million. Now let's pivot over to the annual cost to rent. So we are assuming that your rent is that $2,600. It increases by 3% every year. And we're also including the percentage increase for insurance. So this brings our annual cost to rent $1.49 million, so about $1.5 million. Over here is where we get into the difference if you were to invest the difference. So in this particular case, if you were to invest your down payment in the first year, as well as the difference in annual costs to rent versus own. So in this case, it costs more annually to own, very clearly, versus renting. So that difference is calculated here. If every year you were to invest that difference rather than spend it on other things, at the end of those 30 years, you would have a portfolio value of $2.9 million, almost $3 million. So what does this tell us? After 30 years, in order to have equity in your home, you would need to sell that home for over $2 million. Whereas if you were to just rent, yes, you are quote unquote throwing away $1.5 million, but you have earned almost $3 million. So your net difference is $1.5 million. Am I saying this is a better decision? I don't know, because it totally depends on your life. It may make more sense for you to own the home because you have a child and you need to go to school and you need to have a place for them to grow up. That's totally different. The decision doesn't need to be purely financial, but what this does is it lays out the numbers because as I mentioned in that original video, everybody's caught up in equity. But if you spend $699,000 on your home and you sell it for $1 million, you've still put in $2 million. So you didn't really actually make any money. But again, back to what I've said 100 times, I feel like in this video already, there's nuance to this because if you were to sell the home at year 10, the amount of money that you put into the home is a little bit different compared to if you were to stay in that home for 30 years. So what that resale value would be, I can't predict. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. Everybody says every year home prices go up. I think that we are putting on rose-colored glasses based off of the extreme appreciation of home prices over the last few years. I don't know if that's a sustainable thing. Nobody does, right? Because nobody can predict the future. So to say that home prices always go up, I think is, a optimistic assumption. But again, we're also making the assumption that your investments are going to grow. So, there's two assumptions here. I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. I'm just saying this is the math. And this is conservative math, okay? Like your cost to own would probably be higher because generally speaking, unless you live in California, your property taxes do increase. If the value of your property is increasing because they get reassessed every year, and obviously if the goal is for the value of your property to be going up, then you have to anticipate and expect that your property taxes are also going to go up as well. So that's not, again, an as simple and straightforward thing to forecast, but it is something to keep in mind here. So this is the comparison for renting versus buying on Cape Cod. Now I'm going to move into the example in Chicago. So we are looking at this piece of property here, which is a 2-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot condo in Chicago at $575,000. If we were to scroll down here, you can see too, the HOA fee is $387 a month. And where Chicago is really kind of like a loser is the property taxes here are very, very high. And we're going to compare it to a 2-bed, 2-bath condo up in Ravenswood at $3,400 a month, which based off of current rent in this area of Chicago is pretty accurate for a 2-bed, 2-bath unit. So here we have all of those inputs. We have the $575 home price. We're putting 20% down, same term, 30% for the mortgage, 6.6 for your interest rate, property taxes I put in. So as you can see, they're significantly higher. We're going to assume the same for homeowners insurance. Again, that's nuanced. You can change it if you want. Maintenance, we're going to assume 1%. And then HOA, I factor that in. That's $4,600 a year. Again, assuming that that doesn't go up, which it probably will, but it doesn't go up in a linear fashion. So you can come in here and play around with that if you want to forecast something out for HOA in your own unique situation. Here we have the $3.4 thousand for monthly rent. We'll do a 2% increase. And you know what? I'll increase this insurance to $400 a year with the 1% increase as well. We're assuming a 7% annual growth rate. And here, if we were to look at the total cost to own, we're at 2.0 million, so 2 million and some change. And the total cost to rent, we're at, 1.6, almost 1.7. So this number is highly inflated for two reasons. One, because your property taxes are significantly higher. And again, this is a very conservative low estimate because we're not factoring in an increase here. And then, you also have the HOA, which is a sunk cost. So something that's really important to think about when it comes to the purchase price of the home is the property taxes, obviously. Are those property taxes going to be reassessed? Is there an HOA fee? Like, these are all sunk costs and they don't go towards equity in your home, okay? And we seem to just overlook this with this idea that home ownership is better. Obviously, if you live in a standalone home without an HOA, then you don't have to factor in those costs. But a lot of places do have an HOA now, especially if you're in a new community or if you're in like a condo or an apartment building, which a lot of people are, especially in cities if you're going to purchase in a city. So if we were to come over here and look at the difference in costs, clearly year over year, the difference in costs for this situation are not as severe because it costs more to rent in a city and the purchase price of this home was also lower. But again, if we were to invest that difference, including the down payment every year, the total value of your portfolio would be $2.25 million. And the difference would be almost $600K. So again, with this information, you can evaluate, is that $600K wealth that I can tap into that's liquid cash worth the trade-off of, putting money into this home that I may or may not be able to sell at a gain, right? Because let's say in 30 years, you sell the home for $1 million, it appreciated $400K over those 30 years, then you're at a net loss of $1 million, and you may have been better off renting and investing the difference. So what these numbers tell us is what the different scenarios could potentially look like over this 30-year term. And with that information, you can make the best decision for you. Now I want to highlight here, if you were to make an extra payment towards the principal, because this is something that lots of people do. So let's imagine that you were going to invest, let me zoom this in a little bit, you were going to put an extra $1,000 a month towards the principal on your mortgage here. So I'm going to put $12,000 because this is annual, and you did that for the first, couple of years. We'll say the first 6 years. Look at how that changes your mortgage payoff, okay? That buys you 7 years off of your mortgage, and that totally changes the numbers here, okay? So that's another layer of this that you can play around with if you had additional money or you were able to pick up a second job and put more money into your home, if that's a trade-off that you want to make, and pay off your mortgage early. It makes a big difference, especially at these ultra high interest rates. Now, if we were to change the interest rate back to COVID times and it was 3%, again, it totally changes the argument. And I think that's where people are thinking of equity and buying being better, is we have this lower interest rate mentality, and we're forgetting that the interest rates are having an enormous impact on the affordability of homes right now. So that is why it's so important to run these numbers and really evaluate what the entire purchase looks like, so you know what your total outflows can be, and again, make a more informed decision. Okay, we are now in this last example, which is Pittsburgh. And so I am looking at a townhome in Pittsburgh that's for sale for $335,000. It's a 2-bed, 2-bath. And we are comparing it. It's in a similar location, as are all of the other examples. We're all in similar locations. We are comparing it to a 2-bed, 2-bath condo as well, similar location again. So this one is listed at $2,145, and the home, as I mentioned, was $335, I believe. Yes. So I have all of the inputs here. This is the more affordable option because Pittsburgh was recently ranked the most affordable city in the US. So we have the purchase price of $335 with a 20% down payment at $67,000. The mortgage amount is $268. We have a 30-year term. Interest rates, again, are 6.6%. So that brings your monthly mortgage and interest payment to $1,700. Not that bad. Property taxes in Philly, I took this right off of Zillow, 1.4%. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's what it said on the listing. Home insurance, again, we're flatlining it at $7,000. It may be lower since, this is a different area. I don't know, and there's actually no way for me to know. So you can make adjustments to this if you decide to get this calculator and run your own calculations. Maintenance, again, we're assuming 1%. And then HOA was $267 a month. So I forecasted that out for the year at $3,200. So with rent, we have the $2,145 here. We're assuming a 3% increase. I put $300 for insurance with a 1% annual increase. Again, I feel like this is being kind of conservative because my renter's insurance for the whole year was like $100 in a city. So I don't really know, but again, we're just putting in some estimates here. And so this is where the buying actually, may make more financial sense, because if we look at your total spend over the full 30 years, we're at $1.2 million, which is about $1 million in additional costs beyond the purchase price of the home, most of that being, interest here. And then we have the HOA and all the maintenance and whatnot. Versus if you were to rent, it would be $1.2 million. So about the same. The difference is literally $45 based off of the current assumptions that we have. And if you were to invest the difference in the years where you are renting, that it costs, your total annual rent amount is less than your mortgage, which is only for these first 14 years. After, you invest that difference and then you just let it cook for the remainder of the term, which is how this calculation works. At the end of the 30-year term, your portfolio would be worth about $1 million. So if you were able to sell the home at a break-even point, then you lived rent-free for those 30 years, but you don't have the liquid accessible cash, but you would have, the money back technically on your home, right? That's equity, or more than you make money. So it really here, this is another instance where you just have to decide if the cost to own is worth the opportunity cost of investing the difference. There is no better than or worse than option. I think when it comes to renting and buying, this is something that we really need to stop saying. We need to walk away from that thought process and just run the numbers. Let's look at the scenario as well. If you were to put an extra, $1,000 a month towards your principal for the first 5 years, it would dramatically change how much you're paying in principal and interest over the course of the loan. You save $100,000 total, most of which is interest, and you buy back 10 years off of your mortgage. So, taking out a 30-year mortgage with the plan of putting additional money towards principal or potentially refinancing could make a huge difference. Let's swap this out here and bring the interest rate down to those COVID rates of 3%. Then it becomes a no-brainer because, the difference is severe and your portfolio value isn't high enough really to justify spending all of this money in rent. But if we were to go to the Cape Cod example, in this case, you are earning 2x what you would have spent in rent. And the likelihood that you sell your home for over $2 million, again, I can't say it's low because who can predict the future, but it's a much bigger appreciation that has to happen compared to just investing the difference. So these are 3 examples. Hopefully what this does is just illustrate what the cost could look like. If you are someone who is thinking about purchasing a home and you want to run the numbers, this is the kind of thing that you should be looking at, because in this quest for equity, we lose sight of the fact that there are all of these sunk costs, and particularly in the current environment we're in, where interest rates are really high and property taxes do continue to rise, the sunk costs are severe and they're not factored into this idea of equity. And we forget that there are other ways to build wealth in the interim if housing feels like something that you can't purchase right now. So anyways, if you're interested in purchasing this calculator, it's in the show notes. If you have polite thoughts or opinions, I would love to hear them. I'm really open to polite discourse. Oh, the other thing I want to highlight too, that this calculator can't even capture, that would put the conversation in favor potentially of purchasing, is obviously when you rent, you have to factor in that you may have to move every couple of years, and moving is expensive. But again, there's no way to forecast when that would be or how much it could be. So that's where these calculations become so incredibly nuanced. So what I think the value of this is you get a baseline idea of how much would I spend over these 30 years if I purchased versus how much would I spend over these 30 years if I continue to rent. And if I were to be smart and invest that difference, what would it look like? Because the other layer is some people choose to rent and then they don't invest that difference. And then, a house is for savings. So if they had purchased, yes, they would be spending more, but at least they'd be putting that money into an asset versus just spending it. So it really boils down to smart financial decisions overall. If you're going to rent and then you're not going to invest that difference, then it may not make sense to rent. And that, again, is where we get into the nuance of these conversations and why we can't just say, purchasing is better than renting or renting is throwing money away. It just so depends on the location, the individual, and the circumstances and how things unfold. So anyways, if you enjoyed this video, let me know. If you have a suggestion of a city or you would like to see a part 2 of this series, let me know in the comments. And with that, I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.